But if they were to go and then inspect the war veteran, kuti ndikatanga apa ndikuenda papi. Saka ini ndikaretire semsoja. Ndokuchengetwa kwandinoitwa heroko. Saka unoramba kuti ndiite msoja because uri kuona vakuru havasi kuchengetwa. So the first thing we have to do is we have to take care of those people. It's the same thing as any retirement, whether it's private sector, kind of you're a government employee, civil servant. My grandmother was a civil servant for over 30 years at a school, and her pension is $18. Imagine $18 a month.
Moody say, can you tell me Moody say? Moody say, can you tell me Judy say? Mama get a Moody say, Moody say. Boy. Moody say, yeah. Incoming. Ndenge Maradona, ndenge ndichidisha, ndichipasa, ndichigona. Inga mnozviziva anomakwane bora. Ndenge vachizama kundisendera magora tumahora asi zvinhu zvatinoona mnazamora.
1 2 sound check 1 2. Rufara vanhu vaMwari.
Nasi usazonimakisa.
Kusi ungoti ndinomakisa kuyoka makisa.
Last time ngavunza futhi nchasi sinabasa. Abo. So uvunda jina. Uvunda jina.
Dawenzo vunda mkurani kuti plan alpha plana.
Plan.
Koza mpisa ndakatora star yake kugeto kwangu kwa. Aunakana munhu anomiziya.
But asatotanga campaigner. CCC hasatotanga campaigner. ZANU-PF yatanga campaigner a little bit because much of that aware. But everyone else hasn't really started campaigning. Hey, James Atonga to politics in 2005. It's different. It's never going to be the same.
Yeah, I'm going to say actually I'm a sense of urgency.
So don't try to say exactly. Akati you're right, Jason, you had a political strategy. What should I do?
Saturday tiri kuchambanje. Kuchitongezo.
Jobs kalonzo takabuda mjeri manje ninyedzo.
Tiri kuchambanje. Then next weekend tiri kufia. Then amfana asikuzikanwa phela.
Yeah, but kuzikanwa kutore time. Unozongopopa ka one. Pastor Ivan akatora time yakareba sei kubva pawakatanga kusvika vakuzikanwa neZimbabwe.
Pastor Ivan igwara. Handiti wakazotisiya tiri pamawani kuAmerica.
Unozovaudzere vauya Pastor Ivan kuti igwara because vari kuuya lately.
Ndakatoposta ndini ndakatanga kuposta pawakaposta kuti amafred my life what I'm in America. Taenda tese mastreets takapfeka flag tichiti this country #this country. Ungofunga family yako nemavisa family yako isusu nefamily dzedu. Embesa idanzi stand up in my stadium moment sing the national anthem. Tese tosumuka handiti. Eyo zongwereka aenda kuAmerica. What is this end beef nayo.
But I think I'll we actually try to get him on sometime. On your song
this year watantrofana nyanzo kuita serious kubvunza mubvunzo iyo. This year nimpesa uyana aruya nasu. Boys muri nyatso serious. Because izada kuti kana mati chinhu ngatichimhanya. Tonyanzo ono rotona turikumhanya nechinhu chacho tonyanzo chimhanya chinhu chazvikubatanda. Because pane zvimwe zvekuzoti ngatichimhanye tisati tichimhanya tega. My vote is my right. And I'm going to take my time to decide who to vote for and who not to vote for.
And I think that's one of the dope things is there are lots of people right now who think that I'm going to take my time closer to elections and those are decided who am I going to vote for. And I think that's what makes it possible for someone like Chapman to constantly participate in these elections. Because I don't think people are very decided. People are not happy na Chamisa, people are not but that's Juno.
So I'm not happy with the zvakataka mazvinyeka ma11 kakaitika nekanyake kuti anzi especially akachamisa achingoti achawana mavhotsi zviri easy this time mawana because kana udanyazoziva kuti alpha
but kana kuti chamisa kwana kwake mavhotsi ari mawana ZANU-PF kwana kwayo mavhotsi
ZANU-PF this time inogona kutowina nemachokwadi isina kuriga manje. Do you know kuti kumamishoku ZANU-PF yakavaka iright yavo vanofanira kutozvita ndobasa ravo but vakavaka zvipatara vakata sese zvokuti chembereri kumushoku kwanoedza kuti ZANU-PF yakashata noza kuti unopenga here nemufamba 3 kilometers
but ZANU-PF can easily do zvinhu zvakadaro because they're using ndo government saka kuti ZANU-PF yakavaka hospital kana kuti government yakavaka hospital zvinhu tu zvato
isusu muharare ndisi kuzviziva but munhu ari kumushoku ari kuona harare yakanyorwa nzi yakavakwa
disbursed funds
aiwa disbursement funds anokanganwa devolution funds ukuona vandi kutoona kutoti economic devolution ed
economic development ed
vandi kuona saka ezvinozvi kumamisho ukoko ukauya uchiwadza kuti this time vanogona kuwina hawe zvisina kunzi takati ne35 mavhotsi pachati but patakazosvika kuzeki tanga ne 2
mavhotsi akamuvha necromatography papepa ingi ichimuvha ndakaisa paMDC ikaenda yega
hakuna zvinhu this time because vakomana vari kushanda aiziva saka ini advice yangu kune vakomana varoda kuzviita zviite ndekuti this time havafanira nazosunga dzisimba nyika itori netwita boys parira plan yekuti hameno kuti vachaita sei ndisi politician ini ndiri munhu anongozivonawo zveichiitika but this time mawani saka ndomubvunza yangu enda kubvunza makuru anu kuti masvipira here
ngakutosvika
ndoda kubvunza
ndamubvunza nyaya wakaona video yaitaura shoda yaitaura chirungu but neshona accent but ari kubulawayo
that video was wrong in everything.
But I have to ask him about that. I'll ask him about that. And then also, like, bro, blood is a business. That's actually his main thing. And does it affect business or does it help business? Could we tell politics?
I think my opposition in Zimbabwe one of my ideas. And my ideas are all akatopengwa strength. Because zvamai manje shamena ngani mari kudarika triple C but triple C inogona ngene plan kudarika Chapman.
Yeah.
So I think boys role handisi kuti angawazviita but ungoti
but in the interview that he did na Trevor Ngube, Trevor asked him about nyaya kuti madima mabatana and he says kuti he approached CCC to guys Twitter say, and apparently they said we need to give you goat skinning duties. That's what I assumed it means, but I actually don't know if that means. But brother, kuti indrukuya cash ndinayo mari yacho ndoisa patable muregira kuita zvemagofundme yekutengera Chamisa mota
but chinonetsa manje kuti hatiri kuziva and I prefer MDC better than Triple C because Triple C
MDC kana uchirida
manje yana mukomadhagi but
hakuna yakupe kuti
akupe akadzoka kuTriple C
koya mutambara
mutambara akurarama
akatonyora book manje
ari Triple C
Mutambara. Oh, is it? Okay.
But ndikuti nini tiri kusika initials emunhu manje ona part yakupersonalize MDC ukatoona kutoti initials atakurevechi zvakatosiyana nekuti chamisa chete chete.
But chamisa chete chete ndimi naNick Mangwana munema kuzogadzira ma-acronym.
No, but ndozvo zvinongoreva kuti tiri kusika.
No, zvinoda kuti Citizens Coalition for Change.
Before azoniti Citizen Coalition for Change, waitoziva kuti kana uchisipotera chamisa waitonyora pastatus pako kuti CCC chamisa chete chete. Iye baba azongozvitora baba azotsvaka mazita anorayima anomeka sense baba. Saka ukaona chinhu chinenge chatoora ina asi kuti hangu chakaora pandikuti
chaora chinhu chacho CCC.
Kosi chimwe chinhu futi chinhu chatofanira kuisa
unonzozandataura ndati chaora chinhu chacho CCC.
Nasina. But una panga pano pacho unonza munakazora muna 2000. Akazora 2000. Akadozora wa MDC yako.
Yeah. Hello? Hello?
Has Africa?
I think so.
Our guest has arrived. So we're in the need of preparing questions for you.
Now the government's becoming sort of having its own scheme. Schools are selling school uniforms.
Yeah.
That's where we are now.
That's where we are now.
So people are waking up to it.
Yeah.
And they're saying, you know what, we've seen the same faces that have been trying to contest for years. In fact, all the faces have been in government except for us. You know, so you think of the top 3 candidates or top 4 candidates, we are in that mix, and you start wondering, the other 3 have been in government and have completely failed. They went into a GNU, enjoyed the spoils, didn't do anything. Had control of parliament, didn't do anything.
Yeah.
So we have a huge advantage where people are going to look and say, you know what, I think it's time for us to really try something different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and that's where it becomes very interesting in the context of who you are right now in Zimbabwean politics. And you talked about Nkosana Moyo before we started shooting a little bit earlier. And before him was Simba Makoni as well, in the 2008 election and then in the 2017 election. And I think what was missing in both those political aspirations, if you want to call it that, is the balance between what would be considered a good leader. These guys were people who, you know, we universally consider to be knowledgeable and to, you know, we think they would make great leaders. But I don't know if they were great politicians. And there is an aspect to be a great president. I remember Obama said to Trump at some point before Trump eventually won, but he said to him, well, to be the worst president or to be the best American president, you'd have to be a president first, because he thought he would lose. And I think that's the thing that I think is important or missing, is someone who comes in and says, I do know the right things to do. Like the way that we're handling our economy is the wrong way of going about it, whether it's the fiscal or monetary policy. But also at the same time, I know what it takes to win a Zimbabwean election. I know what it takes to get the person in Berengwa and in Oticho to understand and to go and say, you know what, Robert Chapman is my guy.
Yeah.
And what are we doing from you know, a DUZ perspective to convince people of that?
That's a great question. One of the first things we did, we looked at what kind of leadership what kind of people was I surrounding myself with. And so we started looking at secretary generals that are experienced, organizing secretary that is strong and experienced. When it comes to putting things on paper and working towards execution and making sure we're looking at the country, those things, you know, as I speak, I can talk about those because I have been part of societies that have these entities. So I know they exist.
Yeah.
And I know what the framework of those things look like. When it comes to the politics side of things, essentially, we're building, if I can use an example, we're building a restaurant.
Yeah.
But I'm not a chef. I know how to run a business. What I do is I hire the best chef. I hire the best sous chef. I hire the best wait staff.
Yeah.
And we make sure that our marketing, advertising, you know, that allows people to come in and experience something new. Everything that comes in. So I don't have to be the one that does it. What is important that I surround myself with people. So that evolution of making sure that I surround myself with people that, one is they're watching, you know, because I don't have eyes in the back of my head, they're watching, eyes the back of my head, and those with experience that have been part of other political entities or outfits are able to see the speed bumps or the landmines up ahead and say, let's start to make a maneuver, let's start to make a change here. And so one of the things I've been extremely fortunate is having an amazing organizing secretary that's done a phenomenal job in making sure that we actually build an institution. We were traveling, over the last few days, we've traveled a lot. I think we've been in 6 provinces, or we've at least crossed the 6 provinces in less than a week. We've been to, I think, 9 cities in less than a week. And one of the things that we're traveling together is we are talking about, the next 90 days, the organizing secretary. And one of the things he said, he says, Mr. President, we should not be in the same car together as we travel, because if something happens, that we don't want the institution to stop. And for me, when I'm discussing these things in every interview, I said, what we have to have in place is an institution, so people can exit and enter, but the institution remains intact, and it has its right foundation set. So to answer your question, when people are now going in talking to folks on the ground, my team helps me. I can't use the same universal message, because people are experiencing different things in different places. At different ages and different cultures inside our country. My team does a great job of making sure that we're prepared to share that message. But what is unique and what is seems to be a joint conversation for the entire country is people can't feed their families. No. And people want jobs. They don't have jobs. The informal sector is growing. In fact, I'll tell you a story later, but the informal sector now has an informal sector. I'm serious. There are people who are paying fees to council. Then there's others that are not paying fees because they're not in.
Oh, so you're not paying on the outside?
Yeah, so they're not paying the fees because they're out.
Those are the economies, right? That's how the country's still functioning.
Which is horrible.
Yes,
it's very bad. So. But the one thing that people are coming to conclusion is that the system has failed. They're no longer looking at, is this ZANU-PF, is this CCC, is this MDC, or whatever faction of opposition. What they know is the people that have been in government for some time have completely failed the people. Until we launched, there really wasn't another alternative for them to consider. And that's why we're seeing everywhere we go, the numbers continue to get larger and larger.
But Chiripabundara, I'm from Stungliza. And then I was having a conversation in my guitar use. Me face a data president, I find Obama so. One on the second. Because I'm going to data president. So I'm just saying, I think my voters, my opposition machines, they come from urban communities. But in your case, people from the urban community, they don't know you. You have never reached out to them.
To be fair, Chitunguza is barely urban. But go
on. But I'm just saying.
No, so you bring up a very good point, right? And that's one thing that people looked and said is the time frame of our launch. Is that the right? You needed a 2-year run, right? Coming into 2-year run. People ask us these questions all the time, and the answer is timing. We can have the right message. We can put everything in front of folks. But the timing of our penetration is important. Making sure we have the right leaders on the ground. So we've recently made some changes. One of them actually affects the very area you're talking about. So we reorganized that area, and you will see us in places like Chitunguza. But what happens is we have fatigue in our politics. So the moment this election ends, we can already see some parties already gearing up for contesting this election. Instead of what they should have done is being proactive at the Kumashuro. Reform by 11th hour. Problem is, kana tabuda me election. Takutopinda imwe political dialogue for the next 5 years. Wanoneta nejumish. So wanoneta inanshida kutombu taranyadzi politics until it's just kupinda kuti we are different. But if we do that too early, wanoneta satashika pa election. So apa tine panenguwa manje panapa kuti registering to vote, even kana usina candidate, and don't register to vote because panozosvika July, because panoranzwa date 2 days date yaananzwa ndo panozopera registration. Saka iwe wakona kuti politics dzakunakidza. Obama kana kuti Chapman asvika kuno kuchingwiza ndoda kuvhotera mudhara iwe hauna kuregister kuvhota. Vakutomira dzimwe 5 years manje. Saka ipamba nenyaya, but the leadership inenge iri paground ichibata nzvimbo idzodzo. That's where the difference comes in. So, nyika yese chigadzira ne-organizing team tichigadzira kuti aiwa team iri kushanda ndeipi, vamwe vari kuti ndiri kubudirira zvinhu, vamwe vari kuti ndiri kushanda nezvandinopiwa izvozvo. You can see kuti leadership yacho inenge yakachinja imomo. Saka tiri kusvika kwamuri, there's no question. Social media and WhatsApp tinatsojoina ipapo because people have that access. Tikungoita marally everywhere tichienda, which is a comparison between kuti aima muna vanhu soma zvinhu zvese zvizvi zvemarally chete.
And you have those rallies, Van Waiter. What did they have at some point? James Boram Sango.
Yeah.
Where your rallies are full, you give everyone chicken in or t-shirts or whatever.
Yeah.
Speaking of merch, we need to get, but whatever it is that you're doing for people, and then eventually people get tired.
Yes.
But a very fair question.
Yeah, but Truku, we're seeing this in areas, but you'd be surprised. There's not an area that I've gone to where people don't recognize and say, Chapman. There's not an area I go to. Because even when the team would say to me in their areas and say, no, come here. President, I'm talking about what they want is muri visible, muri present. We said, no, let's run. So 90 days, 100 cities is our goal. So 90 days between now and voting days is 100 cities. The goal is to visit every single one. I think even Chitungwiza. Yeah, even Chitungwiza, not a meeting for itself, because as soon as the candidates come out, a proclamation, they'll start to see our candidates coming. My candidates, but there's already my structures, but the fact that you're saying this, we need to now go back and say, guys, we need to increase activity.
So, and this is something that you guys were both touching on, which is the voter apathy that is in the country. And a lot of it based off of people, like you're saying we've had stints of ZANU-PF, pretty long one. We've had the GNU that also didn't, it felt like it was working for a little bit and then it stopped. And then, nothing really happened post that. But I think one of the things that people don't consider when it comes to Zim is how deeply rooted some of the issues are. So when we talk about corruption, we talk about gold mafia, and we talk about, the state funds that would be coming out of NASA or whatever. And then fair and fine, those are probably the larger amounts. But the corruption that people aren't ready to talk about is the fact that everyone in this country knows that it costs $200 to get a driver's license. Like, that if you take $200, you're walking out with the driver's license. And I don't know how much the people at VID are paid. Let's say they're some of the better paid people in government, they get $500. And you bump them up to $2,500. Does that person still not have the incentive to collect an extra $200 from 2 or 3 people during the day to bump up that $2,500 that they're making? And I think that's how deeply rooted that is. And I don't know if there's a solution to that level of corruption.
There is, and you bring up a very important point. So if you look at our 3 pillars in the Democratic Union of Zimbabwe, we've got prosperity, we've got justice, and we've got modernization. Yeah. The most important pillar, which is the hardest work of our administration, in any administration that goes into power in this coming election, is justice. Yeah. The ability to improve that is what changes it. So what we have right now is we have a systematic culture now, that's a behavior that's innate in our society, that someone knows if I'm going to get a passport, to mention a driver's license, or I'm going to go to get something done somewhere. If it's I need a service provider to provide something at my home, and you pay a little bit extra so they can bump someone off and I get to the front of the line, right? So we have this culture now that it's innate there, where we're paying
for things.
That should be already incorporated into the cost of whatever that item is.
That's almost that society, right? Like the consoles, outside the console that you're talking about.
Yes.
Like a little mini.
Huge society. It's a societal problem. There's a couple of ways we do that, and I want to be very careful in how I say this when we talk about justice. One is we have to improve the quality of policing that we have in this country. But in order to do that, we're running essentially several parallels at the same time. So you mentioned one is looking at salaries and increasing salaries. If we look at MPs, of course, they should not take $40,000. But if you look at the way it's set up right now, that they have to either travel outside the country to get their perks, and that's essentially how they're making money, that system's broken.
Yeah.
So how do we increase the salary? But when we increase the salary of, say, police officers, we want our police officers to get paid well. That means we are now going to increase the quality of recruitment that comes into the police department.
Yeah.
Because the police now have to come in with certain qualifications. So you might do the minimum, you have to have a high school, high school diploma, whatever, my A levels.
Yeah.
But when I now go to university, you don't go to university. But when police you qualify with at least my A levels and things like that. So VID, there has to be an auditing department that exists in an anti-corruption setting that is there inside that institution, because people now working, they know, one is I'm getting paid well. But if someone reports or a whistleblower comes and says, I was just asked to pay $200 by a specific agent at VID, that is immediately investigated. All it's going to take is a handful of examples of people being arrested, and we start to see the culture slowly change.
Yeah.
So the justice part of this is extremely important. We're not following it. Even today, we see our judges and lawyers, if they do the right thing, they'll make a right judgment, but it's against someone of power, they'll get slapped in the wrist or something, they'll lose their job or they're asked to step down.
Yeah.
So the strength of prosperity and the strength of modernization comes by having a pillar where the rule of law applies. And we have to change that and be very delicate in the way that we do it. Yeah. But we slowly start turning, if you're turning a cruise ship, if you're familiar with boats, actually even planes, you can make certain turns up to certain angles before it becomes a problem.
Yeah.
And a certain speed.
But when it comes to the sharp turn that you have to make, or the slow turn, a lot of it comes with pain. And for instance, when you talk about like introducing better standards for policing or for recruitment of police officers, right? It means that there are people that wouldn't be able to do that. But I think the issue that we've had, if I was to go back from the time that I've been an adult in this country, is we pick politics over economics.
Correct.
At every turn, whether it was paying civil servants more than we could afford, or it was paying bonuses when we didn't have the money to do that and we had to print, we've consistently done that. Or whether it's an auction rate where there's a preferential rate, like that list is endless. And I don't know how easy it is to go and say, you know what, the right thing for our police force right now is to introduce higher standards. This may not be popular in a country where in the last couple of years, a lot of people haven't been able to finish their A levels because of the economic hardships, but this is the right thing to do, and eventually it will pay out. How are you going to handle the pain?
That's a great question. So transition is, any change is, as human beings, we like to be in routines, or, it's usually better to be in a routine. But when change comes around, we sort of, there's always some level of resistance. What happens, we have to incentivize. So the goal is not to say we're going to go and wipe out the entire, let's stick with the police as we're talking about. It's not to wipe out the entire, policing landscape, and we're starting from fresh and we're putting people in. There are police officers that are good that don't have, may not have, say, a minimum requirement to get in, but they have an innate intellect that exists for them to be able to see things, investigate people, read people. They are very good in negotiating situations, or they might have experience in dealing with things like domestic abuse. So if they're called to a certain area, they're very aware of this. And that's even culturally, right? So if there's domestic abuse in an area, one police officer might view that as this is culturally acceptable. Where one police officer might say, actually, this is not acceptable.
Not okay.
Correct. So what we do is we would create incentives for people to say, listen, here are the requirements we want to have. And you may never have had that opportunity to go. There are scholarships or opportunities that allows you as a police officer to maybe attend a night school and start working towards that measure. But what it does is starts encouraging people, because just increasing the salary alone, doesn't really mean we're going to expect change inside whatever institution we're trying to reform. But what we want to do is encourage people to take the incentives there for them to increase that level. Let me come towards now the politics in economics. I had a conversation last night. It was right down this line. We talk about one of our things that we have in our manifesto is regentrifying the CBD. Santon's a good example. People relate to Santon. We're looking at condominiums, mixed use buildings. So you're looking at retail at the bottom, accommodation at the top. There might be a hotel in the middle, and then accommodation and condos at the top. You're looking at rooftop restaurants. You're looking at very nice things on a weekend. People can walk their dog. There's a lot of green space that exists. We want to create pockets of suburbs around the country, so it relieves the CBD of pressure on decentralization, but around. So Westgate has its own sort of communities and so forth as we go around. And someone asked and said, well, there's kunemsika pane renki papo pa people paduse ne CBD mo paduse ne pa Eastgate.
Oh, Eastgate,
pa Mikos. Yeah, so how do you remove all those people? And I said, we wouldn't do the military style like what was done in Mbare, which causes major chaos.
Yeah.
What people want is an alternative to say, you know what, I'm sitting here selling tomatoes and I'm not guaranteed what sale I'm going to get. But if we come back and say, listen, we've got a huge road development, which one of the things I want to be known for in my administration is building the highway networks of this country, which is the essential veins and lifeblood of our economy. People have to be able to travel up and down east-west in the SADC region. If you want to go from north to south, you pass Zimbabwe.
Yeah.
If you want to go from east to west, you pass Zimbabwe.
Yeah.
And there's an opportunity for us to capture all the revenue that comes with travelers. So we set that aside for a minute. But if we said we're building infrastructure or we're building factories now, we're redesigning Bata, we're building automotive in Umtare, Toyota comes in or another entity comes in, or putting a tire manufacturing plant or a battery plant somewhere, we will go into that area, minimum $10 per hour.
Yeah.
And there's government housing in the area, but it requires you to move.
Yeah.
What do you think people will do?
Immediately. I might move. Tell me when those jobs are available. I'm there to go.
So what happens, so instead of forcing people out, we want to give them the opportunity to see that there's something that allows them to have a little bit more pride, dignity, and a little bit more permanence or guarantee in what we're trying to do.
Yeah.
So the same thing would apply in every institution that's there. Whistleblowers would be rewarded. And say, if you're whistleblowing, which, I don't want to use the United States as an example, but in the United States in healthcare, in medical billing, you get 20% of whatever they find during an audit if you whistleblow. Yeah, so if they go in and they find a hospital cheated in billing $10 million, you walk away 20% as a whistleblower. Now, of course, someone will probably never hire you again, so there have to be whistleblower protection laws in place.
Yeah.
But we want to have these things where now people know everyone is observant of what we're doing, and what we all want is a functional society.
Mm-hmm. So when just talking of the functional society, and just alluding to something you were saying a little bit earlier about the failed state and the idea of, ZANU-PF and MDC, and I guess that's where we had started anyway. I think one of the issues that have been really difficult for the Zimbabwean, the population to get on is the idea, the polarization.
Yeah.
So I'll give an example. Let's talk about the sanctions. It's almost as if that conversation cannot happen in the frame of the sanctions are bad for this economy, but also corruption is bad for this economy. And these two things, to different extents, depending on whatever what you view it as, have had a detrimental effect on the economy. And I think that's one of the reasons why it makes it difficult, or why there's so much voter apathy, because if you guys can't seem to agree on, the very basics, if you can't agree that corruption is bad and sanctions are bad, then it's likely that we're going to go in there and have an opposite polarization. And coming from the US, it almost feels like a Trump to Biden administration transition, where a lot of the people who are in the middle, which is where most people are,
correct,
are we just went from one extreme to the other, where the right answer was probably somewhere in the middle.
Yes.
Would you say that your political position in this environment is somewhere in that middle, or is it closer to one of the other sides?
It's right in the middle. In fact, ideology, which is on our website, says that we're center-based. And here's where, in fact, not just in Zimbabwe, because Zimbabwe has metrics to support that. When you look at, I think Afrobarometer is one that did, you look at one side opposition, and on this side, the bigger crowd was in the middle that basically threw their hands up and said, you know what, nothing's going to change. And we'll come back to sanctions and corruption in a minute. But at the center is where most people are. So let's have a conversation about building the country, right? So, which is what we're calling for. Let's talk about building this country. Everyone remove your labels that you have. Whatever party you belong to, whatever tribe you belong to, institution, let's talk about what we want. So what's our vision that we want for this country? We want functional schools that our children can go to.
Yeah.
We want jobs and good paying jobs, minimum wage, that when I get paid and I put money in the bank, there's a financial institution, the money, I don't worry about the money in the bank. I'm not trying to keep the money in my mattress. The second one, we're talking about policing, quality roads that I can drive at night and not have a problem. I want to know that if I'm robbed, a competent police officer, if a burglar is going to come and help, and they're fully trained and help me and equip me with these things. And so if we sat down and had that conversation with no labels, we would agree on about 80% of the things we want for our society. Yeah. Then there's 10% we're going to negotiate. Yeah. Right. So there's 10% like, okay, we are going to agree.
How do you feel about LGBTQ?
Yes.
So how do you feel about?
Correct. Yeah. Not child marriage, but there's like I said, we talk about domestic abuse. Yeah. There are things like, hey, people are like, well, culturally, that's this is how we think.
Culturally or
religiously, the way things are. So there are things we're going to negotiate there, and that sometimes comes to education and exposure. Then there's 10% we're never going to see eye to eye on. Yeah. Ever. What's happened in polarization here is we've spent more time focusing on the 10% we'll never see eye to eye on, that we've lost 80% of the things we agree on and 10% that we can negotiate and walk away happy. Yeah. And so we spent 10% is polarized. So we come back to sanctions and corruption. Sanctions are bad for any economy. Economic sanctions are bad, but corruption and sanctions are tied together. Yeah. So the problem is the sanctions seem to lean in one direction, right? If we're looking at political parties and people in politics, they lean towards individuals and institutions. Yeah. I have a problem with the institutions. The individuals, they can lobby and move in the direction they want to and deal with sanctions on their own. Yeah. But when it comes to the fact that our Zimbabwe Defense Forces are on sanctions, I have a serious problem. That means we have a problem with national security. We do. That's a direct infringement on the society, regardless of what political party you belong to. And financial services, which now when we're talking about financial, sanctions, economic sanctions, that now rides up to the executive branch. Yeah, the executive branch has to do something about it. But corruption now ties every politician to it. So no one talks about that. But no one talks about that with vigor, with transparency, and with real enthusiasm to fight corruption, because everyone is eating at the table.
Of the corruption.
Of the corruption. Everyone's eating it. And the $40,000 and the $300,000 and $500,000 that we saw at Christmas while the country was starving was, candidly handed out in Parliament. And no one seemed to even care.
So interestingly, we shot an interview with Fortune Chassis. It's one of the episodes that will be coming out in this first season. And I asked him about those loans. And being a former, he's not a minister anymore. So he said, the first thing he said was, I was not a beneficiary of this. Mm-hmm. However, he says, the job of being an MP in this country is pretty thankless. The idea that they make so much money from it may not be as true as people think.
Correct, it's not.
Yeah, because of the idea, and I think you mentioned it a little bit earlier as well, but you're going out to the constituency, you need money to campaign. People lean on you when something happens in that society. There's a funeral, someone needs medical attention. They're going to ask you for that. And he says that there's no way I would have made money. So he wasn't necessarily defending it, but he was saying, I think it's exaggerated in how detrimental it is. Mm-hmm. And I don't know what your opinion is that, because, that's a thing that's just happened. It's pretty topical. Is there a justification for, let's put the MPs to the side with the 40,000 and talk about the 400,000 to the cabinet ministers. Yeah. Is there any justification for that, or is it just completely bonkers?
There's a middle ground there. So I wouldn't want to go far extremes on there. And I don't want to sound like I'm sanitizing it. Yeah. Because I'm really against it.
Neither do I.
Yeah. I'm very much against it. Yeah. That should never happen, right? They should be able to do, but the issue is that the example that he gave, saying an MP is going to want, when in their constituency, someone dies, they reach out to the MP, is because that society is not prosperous. Why should the MP be responsible for burying relatives or being able to provide vehicles for funeral processions or anything, a wedding that's taking place, or children that are successful but can't go to university because they don't have the fees? They're reaching out to the MP because that society is not prosperous. These are people that don't have jobs, they don't have anything. But saying, we elected you to fix this, and you're not fixing it. Yeah. We elected you to change legislation, to push legislation so that way people can come and invest in our country, jobs can be created, and private sector can start to grow. If people want to start a business, they can start a business, and it's not a headache. So that's the first part. So these things start trickling. In fact, it really starts from the top going down, but we're going to start from the bottom going up. So as that comes up, government then says, our MPs are not making money, so let's throw a car at it.
Yeah.
Let's throw something at it. Let's throw these perks at it. So the only way you get a perk is you have to travel outside the country, and you get your expenditure. Yeah, you get your per diem, and then that's where you eat from, the per diem. So guess what they're doing?
They're on the road.
They're on the road, for the per diem, not necessarily to achieve something for the country. Yeah. We go back to quality candidates that need to be, quality MPs, quality counselors. It's the only way those societies would change. Yeah. So when I talk to people as we travel, I say, don't spend too much time worrying about, the personalities of people at the executive branch, the candidates. Don't worry about talking about Chapman. Don't worry about talking about, the candidate for the CCC, the candidate for ZANU-PF, the candidate for the MDC, and the candidate. You need to find out who the counselor is, your counselor and your MP right here in your region. That's what you should be articulating. And then you can start deciding what that looks like going up to the top. Yeah. But it doesn't matter what happens at the top. If you don't have the right person leading your community, you're going to remain stagnant or regress. Of course. So I'm not trying to justify the loans that they received, but I know for a fact that their salaries don't allow them to really do their job in a correct way, that they have to now go do, they have to go do some graft. Yeah. Things that now, then we start to see a list of corruption. Of course. So the question is, one of the first things we are going to, really probably have a surprise with in Zimbabwe is, what does our national debt structure look like? Ooh. And now we're looking at books, right? Now we're balancing the books in order to make this work at a parliamentary level and work to make the country function. We're looking at, what do our books look like? And, in Zambia, when Hichilema took over, he said it was worse than what was published. I have a feeling we're going to have the same thing here. If someone's going to have a heart attack when they open the national ledger of our country.
I remember when Tendai Biti became Minister of Finance, which would have been 2009, after the election. And he came and he was like, Zimbabwe has $13. I don't remember if it was $8 or $13. Like
in the bank.
I guess everybody's broke. But
but going back to that, it becomes we have to now balance the books. We have to change start looking at changing certain codes. But what we're focusing on is, how do we get people to focus on the job, right? So they're taking care of the family, focus on the job. Here's a great example. Would you want to go in for heart surgery while your surgeon is concerned about paying his car bill? No, in the back of his mind is worried, like, oh, my kid's going to school, but he's getting ready to perform surgery on you. And he's worried in the back of his head, like, man, there's going to be no lights today, at the house, man, my kid's got nothing to eat. And he's about to start performing, heart surgery or brain surgery.
If I had a full head of hair, I wouldn't want my barber doing that. More or less the actual, but so, the idea of we obviously need to build competency. On different levels, but they also, you want to ask something?
Yeah, I want to ask you, given how difficult it is to do politics in Zimbabwe, what inspired you to do politics in Zimbabwe? Because for saying Pakistanis and few people are going to prison, bro, but you want to go head on with the men. What inspired you? What is behind that inspiration?
I've had several interactions in societies I've traveled. So, people think I've just been out, and I've been traveling in and out of Zimbabwe for many, many years, coming in and out of the country for various reasons. One have been, trying to start business, trying to get things moving on this side here at a big, big level. Not just me trying to be independently wealthy and take advantage of the system. But when I started traveling and I would see children and run into children, and I would see them without shoes. It's like the other day I was in Dangamvura. We renovated that basketball court. There's a 11-year-old boy. I didn't post this picture, but I'm happy to show it to you and leave. He played basketball barefooted with me. I played with the kids there. They know me. There we built the court. Every time I go to Dangamvura, I play basketball with them. So this time I brought some basketballs and some soccer balls, and we just gave them to the kids. And I kept one that I was just going to keep in the car when I travel, and we interact with them. As we picked the teams, he's on my team. I look at him and I go, Shamwar. When I put it, now a basketball court.
It's hard, right? Because
it's concrete.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is not an NBA court. This is a concrete court outside. So I said, "Sure, I don't have boots there." I said, "Not boots." Imagine an 11-year-old has no shoes. There's no way that I can go back and sit down as an orphan who's been had a very difficult life as a child, very poor life as a child, go back and sit and think of the level of privilege that I have and just go as normal. There's no way. So it was either a handful of things. As one is I get involved or I support someone that can do it. So when we initially started the Democratic Union of Zimbabwe, it was not me to be the president, to be the presidential candidate. But I kept, as we started digging deeper into things, I became more, I went through several sets of emotions. I was first angry. First you get emotional about it, then you get angry. Then you start figuring out, like, okay, what are the solutions? Because anyone can point out problems, but how do we actually fix this and what direction do we take? So we look at the landscape. This thing is expensive, not just financially. It's expensive to my family. It's expensive to myself. It's expensive to my friends and my colleagues. So this thing is very, very taxing to do. When I remember before we launched, after we built a lot of the structures, I said to my wife, I gave her an out, and I've done it a couple of times even after launch. I said, if this becomes too much, and you tell me that you don't want to do this, I'll stop. And she said, absolutely not, and because she knows that I would not be satisfied that I've lived a fulfilling life if I didn't at least try to change the narrative in my country. So when I look back at my life and I'm 80 years old, and I'm thinking back, I would like to think that I did something. Now here's the mode of encouragement. I love the fact that they compare me to Nkosana Moyo or Dr. Nkosana Moyo or to Simba Makoni, or they use numbers from Dr. Norman Nyika and all these things. You know why? Because they're the pioneers that allow people like me. Now, so you look at their age, and now here comes Chapman at 42 years old. Yeah. I want other people who are 35 or 31 to look at this and say, I'm going to start gearing up that at 40 years old, I want to enter into politics. So I want to enter right now as a counselor and work my way up. So in the next 2 elections, I've made a reputation of, and I built a portfolio of success in my community. By the time I'm 40, I'm running at Senate. I'm running for a senator position because you have to be 40. Yeah. So I'm going to be a senator for my country and move up, or a second vice president or whatever, or be an ambassador for Zimbabwe. So for me, this is a long-term. This is a long game that we're playing, and I think that with the level of information, like we're sitting here right now, you're young entrepreneurs, and you're saying, let's start doing podcasts and increasing our visibility to the country, changing the narrative of the country. Yeah. But we're talking to people, wherever they come from, we're talking to them. The access to information is now more available than it's ever been. So I don't think we'll see. I hope we don't see the level of violence we saw in 2000, between in the early 2000s going to 2000 election, because we're informed now. We don't want to see that level of bloodshed. But the part that's become even more important is our problems are now the same. We don't have functional society or systems. Whether you're rich, poor, middle class, it's not working. Yeah. Everyone can admit it's not working.
Yeah, no, for sure. Mm-hmm. So, and you did talk about that in the interview that you did with Trevor, which is maybe my favorite of the ones that you've done so far. And you outlined a lot of those issues. But one of my key takeaways from that, and it's something that you said consistently, is that DUZ is not an activist group.
No.
We are a political party with a political agenda that we want to execute. And I don't know if that's something that the people have captured in its entirety and what it means, but I think it's what people have been crying for so long is, we want to see what the plan is. We want to see what happens when you become president, as opposed to telling us that corruption is bad. Like, we know corruption is bad, right? Like, there's no question about it.
How do we solve it?
Yeah. How do we solve it?
That's right.
And that's why, for me, the question becomes, how do we solve the corruption at every different level? Mm-hmm. But what that's also made you, I think, is an enemy of both sides.
Yes.
And I remember after we played our round of golf, I came back home. I posted the picture. I put a caption on it where I was mostly just talking about, that I'm not sure if I'd vote for him, but he's a great guy. Mm-hmm. There's no question about that. Maybe 2 hours later, there was someone trying to get into my Twitter. Like, I got a notification, some unusual activity on your Twitter. And I genuinely, till this very moment, cannot decide. Like, I can't understand who it would have been. And I think it's because you really have come and been the biggest thorn in the opposition. You become the opposition's main opposition. And you can see it. They're actively and loudly opposing you and what you're doing. Yet, for the most part, that's supposed to be the same side, right? Like the side of not what's there. I understand people that support ZANU-PF, by the way, but that's the one side. Then there's the other side where we're not doing what's happening right now.
Yeah.
But why is that resistance so much? And do you think there's like any cooling of those tensions that could happen prior to elections or post?
The cooling of, and thank you for that, for noticing that. A lot of people don't really pay attention to that. You're correct. We are not an activist group. An activist group acts very different from a political party or pushing a political agenda. An activist group is things like we see right now. You're seeing, they'll run on stage, or I think one of the Van Gogh paintings was defaced. They'll throw orange paint on buildings. You see, that's an activist group, right? Yeah. So they're going in, you create disruption.
Black Lives Matter.
Yeah, and try to really create and get these things done that are there. Political agenda says, how do we create a dialogue that starts to move the needle forward when we're looking at progress, right? So we say, if you have the heart and mind to build Zimbabwe, we want to talk to you. Yeah. I was recently interviewed by, I think it was Newsweek, Africa, out of South Africa, and they asked me and said, if you, win or lose the election, would you work with the, government or people that want to build the country? I said, absolutely. Yeah. And when the election ends, the election needs to end. And at some point, we have to start building the country. We have to actually take off the political jackets and say, how do we build this thing? Yeah. Instead of going back into political dialogue for the next 5 years and people are exhausted, they're trying to run out of the country. So when we launched, we knew that the first resistance we're going to receive was from opposition. Because now they look just like the people, like ZANU-PF. They're just as violent, just as toxic, they're just as vile, that's there. You see them, they'll tag you. What ZANU-PF has done is they stayed quiet and let that fight just go on its own, and they got distracted. Now you have to understand, that starts from the top. So
at the top of the institution.
The top of the institution, if there even is one. That starts from the very top of the institution. Being honest, it starts at the top of the institution, because the institution came and said, no. If we believe in democracy, they have the right to contest. Yeah. And we are happy that they've joined this race as well, because they'll hopefully galvanize people that might have been exhausted. Our message is going to be different from theirs as opposition. Here's something that you see in political parties in progressive countries. They'll have multiple candidates from the same side. Yeah. So if it's, if you're looking at, say, the Democratic side and you look at the conservative side, there'll be multiple candidates that are running. One might be from LGBTQ, one might be, maybe Black, African American, one's mixed race, one's Indian, one's woman, one's probably a veteran. Then they're running. But what they do is, up at the front, they'll come and say, what do we want to accomplish? Yeah. We want to have transition of power. So our agenda goes forward. So they all unite, and then they pick one person, say, this person's going to lead. That dialogue cannot happen with the current opposition that's there. It is so toxic, the point that it's so personal, that we get away from the politics, that when you start having dialogue, you think to yourself, would I even want to be close to these people? Yeah. Would I even want to be near in this conversation if it took place? So for us, they're essentially the gatekeepers of ZANU-PF, is where we've, in fact, the international community, I was recently at the World Bank Summit in IMF, and people pay attention because our names are on lists. Yeah. So they do research of who's attending either a reception afterwards, because there'll be some, there were 65 dignitaries, there were 65 countries represented at the World Bank Summit. Yeah. So I remember talking to her and said, we looked you up, and man, these guys are really like they're after you. I said, can you imagine that's actually the opposition? Like, imagine the international community actually sees that because it's online. And we say, well, they're just, they're now essentially the same, and they sit together. So it's unfortunate that the polarization is there. It's unfortunate that's happening. But I will tell you, it's a small group of people. When we talk about percentages, it's a handful of people. Like, we even looked at data analytics. You'll find an IP address is managing 10 accounts. So you're like, oh, this is so-and-so. Yeah. They're managing 10 Twitter accounts, and they create this narrative, look like there's many people, but it's essentially one person maybe sitting in South Africa in their underwear, and they're, and they're managing,
your mom's basement.
The mom's basement, managing 10 accounts, and people are starving in Berenguao, you go to, the people in Chivi, or in Chiredzi are working at sugarcane plants and can't even send their kids to school. It's these sort of things. So the real issues are not being talked about. What's happened though is we have not engaged in that toxic side. People don't even realize we've faced resistance in our campaign. We've been denied gatherings. We've been threatened. We've ran away from situations where we might have been, facing attacks. We've experienced the same things, but our goal is we already understood the climate of politics in this country. So what we want to do is talk about real issues, because Zimbabwe needs serious people to solve serious problems in this country. And so that's why we said, no, we're not going to engage in the toxic side. We're going to debate policy. We're going to debate quality of being able to lead this country forward. We're going to debate the ability to put structures in this country and infrastructure that allows the country to start functioning. We want people to have pride in being Zimbabwean. We want people to have, no matter what your color is, what your race is, what your wherever you come from. If you're from Matabeleland, you're Shona or Karanga, whatever you're from, iwo panobuda mnyika unongonzi uri muZimbabwe zvese zvematribe hazvizive.
Not at all.
Iwo uri muZimbabwe niwe wega. So when you're looking at those things, that's exactly what this country needs right now. So for us, peace, reconciliation, and development are the forefront of our political agenda through those three pillars that we discussed. So we choose not to engage in the mudslinging. When you fight with a pig, you and the pig both get dirty. The pig likes it. So we stay away from it.
So if you become president, there are things that how can I put it? Like, this country was fought for.
Correct.
People died for this country.
Correct.
And there are war veterans that are out there. Those guys, they're getting money every month and to say thank you guys for the good job. Are you going to keep on giving them money? And also, are you going to allow the LGBTQ into the country?
Great questions. Those are, man, you went from, on two opposite sides. So let's start with the war veterans. The war veterans is very important. Patriotism is a big deal in this country. They should be rewarded. I don't believe they've been treated fairly on many fronts. The access to healthcare. A lot of these folks even have things such as PTSD, some health issues that have come. When I spoke with some of them, I remember one that said we did meet with some war veterans, and we talked about what's important to them. Right now, if we were to try to start recruiting new recruits for soldiers to come into Zimbabwe and carry a level of pride in the uniform and in the country, I think we'd face some challenges, because one is that the army sort of becomes more politicized now instead of representing national interest, right, regardless of party affiliation. But if they were to go and then inspect the war veteran, kuti ndikatanga apa ndiri kuenda papi, saka ini ndikaretire semsoja ndokuchengetwa kwandinoitwa heroko, saka unoramba kuti ndiite musoja because uri kuona vakuru havasi kuchengetwa. So the first thing we have to do is we have to take care of those people. It's the same thing as any retirement, whether it's private sector, kind of you're a government employee, civil servant. My grandmother was a civil servant for over 30 years at a school, and her pension is $18. Imagine $18 a month. Okay, well,
it's probably less now. The rates moved.
Yes.
At the time that you calculated, the rate was a little bit lower.
It's horrible. So when you start looking at any society, the retirees, if you want to know if it's functional, go look at its elderly and see how that country is taking care of the elderly. So our war veterans are extremely important. They need access to healthcare. There are things like, let's use one division. Let's say what's it called? What are they called? Parachuter, the ones that jump out of planes. When they land on their feet and knees, at their age now, they can probably hardly walk. Maybe levels of arthritis set in. Do we have institutions? Do we have war veterans hospitals that exist in this country that they can go get free service at the highest level?
And most of them, they're having those strokes. Most of them, they're
so to answer your question, 100%. Same thing with the police. Same thing with MPs and government and private sector. We cannot expect the best quality to enter into these institutions that are run by government if they don't see that they're going to be taken care of fairly. We're not talking about bribes and illicit things. We're talking about real things that people can grow up and have pride and say, hey, when I grow up, I want to be a policeman.
Yeah.
You know, when I grow up, I want to be able to
A teacher.
I want to be a teacher
nurse or whatever.
And, correct, because they know they can go in and really have a viable life and know that my paycheck is going to show up.
Yeah.
You know, that I'm going to get paid. So that's a great question.
LGBTQ.
Yes.
All right.
So I've actually answered this one before as well. I was asked about it at the World Bank, as a matter of fact, by Voice of America. They asked me about it. The LGBTQ is I just saw Uganda. What Uganda they criminalized it, and I think Joe Biden might have said that
they're watching the situation.
They're watching it, or they're going to do something about it. To me, I don't think that should be placed on a society. The society has to decide what's taking place. So this is something that goes back to the people. As it stands right now, I believe that certain things are not allowed in this country. And if our society keeps that stance, then that's the stance that should remain. I don't think that decision comes to one person. However, what I will say is that we also have to understand that society is changing. And as our country, as the world becomes more connected, let's say, for example, that it is illegal here for a gay couple to be together. And then one happens to a gay couple that doesn't live in Zimbabwe flies into Victoria Falls. Have they violated our laws? Do they get arrested? You know, there's things of this nature where there's some level of balance as we're part of a larger society. So, and also admitting that we have a gay community that are Zimbabwean, born and raised. We have to be very honest about that. That they're
and it's a pretty big one as well.
Yeah,
it's not a small community.
It's not.
And I think, and not to cut you off, but I feel like there's an element of humanity that
Correct.
has to be respected, with regardless of who you're dealing with, whether you're dealing with women or you're dealing with the LGBTQ community. There's an element of, like, these are human beings.
Correct.
And they're Zimbabweans with rights just like you.
Correct.
I saw the Ugandan the list. I do agree with you in principle. For starters, the US is now going to Qatar to try and do that. They're doing it in Uganda. Whereas the laws in Qatar are probably worse than the ones that they're suggesting in Uganda. So that it has an element of, we feel like we can have that control over you, which I don't like. But
and let me say this as well. Sorry.
Yeah.
So even on that, so let's assume we pass a law that says everything goes well. And this was done in the US, right?
Yeah.
Just because we pass a law doesn't mean that society accepts it. There'll still be attacks on that community. Yeah. So there is a fine balance in saying, when is society prepared to go into this realm? Yeah. And as we say that community starts to grow, they may even have their own advocacy that goes through and says, hey, we want these are measures that come into play. Yeah. But at the same time, that has to go through either some sort of process that the people decide on how they vote for that. How that law gets modified or changed. But we can't ignore there is a human element that even if they're attacked or something happens to them, it happens to that community, there has to be a protection of inside our institution in our society that protects those individuals from essentially discriminatory attacks. Yeah. There will be people that visit our country, love our country, and decide to stay of the gay community. What does this mean for the country? For them as well. So it's interesting. It's a very touchy one.
Yeah, it is.
But it's very interesting.
It is. Just trying to not get this thing canceled too early. So we're gonna move on swiftly. Let's go into something that's more dangerous for you than me. So I wanted to bring it up when you were responding to something that Jason was talking about, and you converted to Shauna. And, it's getting a lot better than it was in the beginning. And I know what that's a product of, and this is why I wanted to tell this story. A year ago, I started out on radio. I didn't have a media career before then. That was the first time I went on. And I am, I'm private school educated. I went for uni abroad, and then I came back. I speak very good Shauna, actually, but maybe not so much under pressure. So when I got there was like a pressure to try and assimilate, because that's the only way that I felt I could be accepted by the Zimbabwean mass market. But I was never, like, it was always obvious that I wasn't that guy. Until I decided at some point during the year that I was just going to be that guy. So we started a gag political party on the air, which was called the Fruit Salads, which was basically a bunch of disenfranchised people who have not been accepted by the Zimbabwean community because they're considered to be too Sala or too this. And over time, I really did feel like people connected with it very authentically. Not necessarily just people from where I'm from, but like everyone, like you're not a bad person. You're just a person who's, you know, been about it a different way. So there was a video a couple of months ago of you in somewhere in the Matabeleland region, and you put on an accent, and that you know, it was very exciting for everyone there. So it was one of the first things that I asked you when we went and we played golf, because I was like, you know, and you were very
I remember this conversation. Yes.
You were very encouraging of people asking you questions, which I thought was really admirable. Like, yo, you know, ask me about whatever you want to ask me about. And even when we were talking about this interview, you said, yeah, you can ask me about whatever you want to ask me about. So I wanted to talk about that a little bit. I would have asked you to do an impression, but it might be the wrong time. But what was that like? To tell me more, because you explained it to me, and I thought that explanation was really good, and I think, you know, it's something that I'd want you to talk about.
Yeah, so it's interesting. So Shona, I can speak Shona. Yeah. Because even with my family, I speak Shona. So
with your family, you speak Shona?
I speak Shona.
Oh, you're that family, not your...
Oh, not my family. Yeah, my direct family. Yes, they'll know some words like my kids. Some are interested, some are not. Some would rather, you know, they'll learn Spanish instead or learn French. So as they get older, they sort of pick their likes based on where they are. Yeah. But for me, that heritage, that's how I communicate with my family here in Zimbabwe. And I communicate with everyone, even in the street. What I like doing is when I go to South Africa, because I can clearly tell someone's Zimbabwean, and I'm there, and then I just say, and they're like, yeah, so especially if I'm with my family, they get surprised. In the part of the accent, I didn't put it on. Yeah, so that came on, I think, as that was the first large gathering I'd spoken to of that size, 800 people in Bulawayo. And so there was a little bit of pressure. So one of the things that I went there, and I wanted to make sure that I didn't offend the people of Matabeleland by speaking Shona. Correct. So I asked and said, is it okay if I speak English? And everyone yelled, yes, go for it. And I said, thank you very much. And so when I started speaking, I think that whether it's subconsciously, that came out as a way for me to bridge a gap of communication by using English to communicate with the people there. And so even when I went to Masvingo 2 days later and had the one in Masvingo, I spoke 90% Shona in Masvingo. You know, when we did in Chinoy, I spoke 100% in Shona. We did other areas, you know, Harare was majority in Shona. So part of it's looking at the audience and seeing how can I communicate. So I didn't realize an accent came out until I saw it trending on Twitter. That, oh, you put on an accent. I'm like, no. I walked on stage. I started talking to people. And that came out as a way for me to, because I knew my own shortcoming in there. So I think my body went back to, how do I communicate this way? So, of course, people hear the accent and say, oh, you know, the way I speak now in English, is American and so forth. But I'll tell you, in America, they know I'm a foreigner. Because they talk, I don't sound American. I don't sound like them. So it's very interesting that anywhere I go. So I feel like I've always spoken this way, and here's why. My grandfather's extremely educated man. And one of the first things they wanted to do to change the direction of their family in the location in Chinoy was sending their children to universities outside the country. So my mother went to university in Namibia. My aunts, two of my aunts went to Kenya. They were in Nairobi. And then when they finished the universities there, they went to the UK and got jobs there in the 80s. So we were fortunate enough growing up, because my family took turns taking care of my sister and I as orphans and take relief pressure. So we were in boarding school 3 months out of the year. And then that holiday, that 1 month out, we would alternate where we stayed. So I would stay in Vinona, I would stay in Marlborough for a month. My aunts in the UK would fly my sister and I to the UK. So we were exposed to these different things growing up early. So when I would go to the UK, you'd use, oh, you got 50 quid, mate. You got 50 quid, all these sort of things that would come out. And then you come back and you're in that society for a month, right? So if you want to learn any language, you have to, what's it called? Submerge yourself into that society. And very quickly you'll learn French. You want to learn French, go live in Paris for a month. You start to, You know, bonjour, au revoir. You know, you eat Italian. You go there. You know, bienvenue. You're going to
pick it up.
You're going to pick it up everywhere you go. You go to Spain. Hola. You know, all these sort of things. So when you're going through these societies, you immerse yourself, submerge yourself. You're going to change. So I'd come back. And I'd sound different in that 1 month because that's what I was interacting with
and
there.
You're so impressionable at that age as well, right? So you're picking up things even faster.
So I don't think I've ever, I don't think I've sounded different, except for if I'm talking to someone. It's the same way if I'm speaking to someone, say of Asian descent, and I don't speak, so if, you know, if I'm saying, if I'm meeting someone in Japanese, like arigato, you know, so if I'm going there, once I get past the part that I know, now I'm going to be even breaking my English to try and sound simple, so I can communicate. So for me, when we were talking in Bloya, which was absolutely exciting, I was galvanized, ready to talk to the people. I didn't realize that that's how I sounded as it was coming out until social media started talking about it. And I was thinking, what accent? And I listened to it. I was like, I can see the difference now. I did an interview a day before, and then with one journalist, and then the next day I'm on a stage and I sound completely different. It wasn't. I had no idea that came out. So I had no idea. So it is what it is. You know.
I think the most interesting thing about you as a political prospect for someone like me, and that's someone with just a keen interest, is that you have come and actually been like vulnerable. You've come and said, and that's the thing. Whenever people, I've talked about that story, spoiler alert, to certain people, and I said, you know, he said he was a big crowd and he was speaking to this crowd for the first time. And there's not a single person that can tell us that they cannot relate to the idea of just being overwhelmed by a situation or a stage. And I think the politicians now in Zimbabwe, in this election cycle specifically, and maybe in the 2017 one as well, are learning about the difficulty of operating in the age of technology. Because there were no cameras before. So Chamisa could go to a rally in Berengwa and say, I'm going to build spaghetti roads. And that information would never get to Harare. The people in that community that he's probably curated his speech around, they can relate to what he's talking about. So like, I remember at one point he went to Murewa and he said, we'll build an airport here so that there's a big tomato farmers community there. We'll build an airport for you guys to be able to export your tomatoes straight from your fields straight to the UK. And of course, like, there are so many loopholes to that, right? Someone's going to come and say, you don't just do that. Like, there are processes that you... But I don't think that even he meant that, oh yeah, we're going to be loading your tomatoes from the boxes onto the plane, right? But it didn't matter before. And now it matters a lot more, because whatever you say, wherever you said, people are finding that information and they're going to come back and say, so what are you saying about this hotel that you want to build over the falls? Because it was said somewhere, maybe not necessarily. And maybe that's also another thing that since
I like to talk about that. I'm glad you brought that up.
Since your last interview cycle is something that's come up. I've watched quite a few of them. And now the gold mafia then happens and there's something about a hotel there and they're like, oh,
I know.
We knew he was ZANU-PF. But yeah, maybe that's something that you have some actual thoughts to.
Yeah. So what's interesting is, man, you talk about lack of exposure. People that responded, even former ministers and people that are supposed to be prominent and have a little bit of what's it called, finesse, in communication. They just jumped on it. But what I liked is it gave us 1 million views. That post had over 1 million views and thousands of comments. People didn't really look at it. When I initially started this journey to get to where I'm at now, one of the first things I try to do is try to get involved in Zimbabwe from the private sector. How can we bring business here? So we looked at, solar, we looked at hotels, we looked at things. Where are areas that have been of success that Zimbabwe can have like a sister city or, a brother city, and they can work together to get that done. And Victoria Falls is very close to Niagara Falls, or Niagara Falls would emulate Victoria Falls. It's a border waterfall. Just as big, they used to argue back in the day which one was bigger, and there's based on width and one based on height, and so forth. There is a Hilton Hotel that's on the Canadian side that is at Niagara Falls. It's not on the falls. Like when I was reading that, I was thinking to myself,
water.
yeah, I'm thinking when I saw people saying this, I'm like, we can't be this shallow.
Yeah.
We can't be this. People, you cannot even build. Like, what am I going to do? Drop it in the Zambezi?
Yeah.
That's not it. So this idea. Yeah, I'm going to put it in put it in a park where elephants are roaming. All these things that people just they don't really. It's so shallow. So.
The idea of it was to build something that was tall enough
to look
further away, but you could look into.
So the part that was missing is there was already a hotel for sale at Victoria Falls. There's already an existing hotel that was for sale in 2016 when this idea came up. So we proposed this in 2016. That property is owned by Old Mutual. So we took that proposal to Old Mutual in partnership with the Hilton.
Yeah.
So check this out. The Hilton Hotel at Niagara Falls employs 40,000 people and creates $2 billion in revenue for the economy. One location.
That's 10% of the Zimbabwean economy.
40,000 jobs at that hotel. And there's a casino inside because it allows people to come in and they enjoy the game. Because the goal is to get people in and they stay, right? Yeah. Which is part of the purpose of casino is like why Vegas is. You go in and you're in there and you walk out and 2 days have gone.
Yeah.
Because
it's been dark the whole time.
The whole time. And they keep bringing you free drinks.
Yeah,
they keep bringing you stuff in Vegas and you're in there and you're just doing 25-cent slot machines, right? Yeah. And you got $10. You've been there for 3-5 hours. So we looked at a way like we've got a new airport at Victoria Falls. There's direct flights from Europe and other parts of the world that now bypass Harare.
Yeah.
So people can fly into Vic Falls, never see the rest of Zimbabwe, and fly right out.
Yeah.
Because we don't have institution. In some cases, they'll fly to Livingston because some of the infrastructure is a little bit better on the Zambia side. So we were in 2016. We were presenting this saying, can we have this? I can't remember the name of the hotel, but it's a hotel that's a little further back. But if you built it high enough, there are certain rooms that would have privilege to see the falls.
Yeah.
But it's already existing commercial property. So they said, no, we went through this dialogue and the Hilton was involved in this from Cape Town, a proposal, and we just couldn't seem to get the finance of the deal done.
Yeah.
For various reasons. Yeah, we couldn't get the deal done. So here we come now. 2016, here comes 2023, Gold Mafia releases out.
Yeah.
And then I said, Victoria Falls Casino.
Yeah.
Now, what's interesting is the opposition tried to pin it on me. It wasn't even ZANU-PF. This is where we talk about toxicity in politics.
Yeah.
The opposition is like, see, this is Robert Chapman, come answer on this. Or what they, couldn't understand or they didn't seem to comprehend was that it was the Al Jazeera investigators that were proposing the casino as a money laundering scheme.
Yeah.
Not ZANU-PF saying we're going to build a casino and we'll launder the money for you.
Yeah.
But they tried to change the narrative. It didn't catch wind because people are smarter than that now. These cheap shots they don't work. Oh, what's going on there? These cheap shots.
He's someone I know.
Okay. The cheap shots don't work. So I'm glad you brought that up because what's it called? That is a real strategy that exists. We're not building this thing to remove wildlife.
Yeah.
There's already existing commercial zoned properties that you can build a hotel that can be tall enough and certain rooms have a privilege to see the waterfall.
Yeah.
So this is just development that's taking place. So what'd be interesting if someone in Zambia does it, and then all of a sudden that side's making $2 billion in revenue, or let's say even one quarter of that, they're making $250 million in annual revenue at one building and employs 8,000 people. And if that could have been on the Zimbabwe side because we failed to understand a concept.
Yeah.
Wildlife is important, and I love elephants.
Yeah.
In fact, I proposed to my wife at the Elephant Cafe on the Zambia side with an elephant as well. I love wildlife. I love for protection. I am against poaching 100%.
Yeah.
There's a balance between modernization, economic development, and being able to keep intact our societal living standards with wildlife.
Yeah.
It's very, very important that remains intact. Same we want to do in the protections of our ancestral lands.
Yeah.
We want to make sure that those type of zonings are done. So people just failed to dig deeper. But I did enjoy the
discourse and the extra views that come with it.
Yes, everyone started knowing who Chapman was because he apparently was trying to build a hotel right in front of the falls.
On top of the
falls.
Let's put it right on top.
Yeah, right on the falls. So, Niagara Falls is fully functional, Canada. And if you actually go to that Hilton Hotel, it's nowhere near the falls, but the picture makes it look like it's right by the falls.
Yeah.
It's not. It's actually like I think there's another street there.
Yeah.
But there are certain rooms that get past a certain point.
Where
in the morning you wake up, you can see the falls. And you're having breakfast brought to your room and you're looking at the falls and people say, you know what, I'll pay $300 a night for that. For that experience.
Man, Victoria Falls, Elephant Hills is $220 a night. Like $300, you might charge $3,000.
Yeah.
But yes.
I know one last question. Zimbabwe, with politics ndara, you have to be financially strong. So financial muscle, because Wangaru campaign ni what you call it? This cheap liquor tumbo, this small cheap liquor.
Yeah.
Like there's like 125 ml bottle of whiskey, homemade.
What?
So apparently there are people who are campaigning. But this is not facts. This is just Jason talking. But
No,
yeah, apparently...
no, but it's true.
Who's general campaign?
Aristotle Mazita. But gonna come in and tomb, whatever to the past new tomb, whatever. But I don't know, come in. So I do see at least I'm sorry need tomb, so but don't say budget. Those tell us are true. That's my get to you.
I was so I probably the farthest my own in budget. Politics is expensive. And not only expensive from a budget standpoint, it is expensive even from personal. We sleep maybe 2 hours a night. We're traveling a lot. And so budget is not there. I can tell you right now that the potential funders, donors are not, I don't believe are supporting really any opposition. So you can see that every opposition is struggling because they have funded it many times over. And some of them went and spent the money on a list of things. This is opposition. Money came in and they failed to garner. Yeah. And you think of Zimbabwe and many other things. So all these things were there. And this is very serious. Yeah. Even for us, it has been extremely expensive on myself and my family. That it's very, very difficult. Our teams have done the same thing. We are counting on Zimbabwean people. We're hoping that Zimbabwean people step in and support political parties as they, if they find themselves aligned to their strategy, we're very open to it. So for us, we're always actively seeking donors. Right now, we're working with the very little that we have as a political party. But I want to also encourage you as a young voter. Zvesa mukaramba muchingoti panosvika politician mundipa something. Panopera mari kuti message ibude kuti vanhu vagalvanize. Here's the reason why. Icho chamunopiwa ichocho ichi. Achigadzire nyika. It doesn't fix your life. Unongodya ipapo 10 minutes zvapera. Iwo wakudzokera ku system isingashande. Saka pane pakakoshera serek ndekuti imi mtanga kubvunza ma-question kuti muchagadzire chi pana papandinogara kundisarame chikumbira hurumende kuti ndichengete. Basa hurumende haisi kuchengeta vanhu. Basa hurumende ndekugadzira environment kuti vanhu vanogara kuita mari dzavo vozvichengeta vari vega. Because hurumende ikakuchengeta iwewe ukatraya manje kutaura kuti zviri kuita hurumende hazvina kunaka, unotorerwa zvinhu zvacho nekuti zvanga zvisiri zvako. Zvanga zviri zvehurumende. Ndiyo prosperity yatiri kutaura ka. Saka ipapo tinofanira kuchinja pfungwa, but nyaya yemari inonetsa sterek kuma-political parties. Isusu tiri vanyowani tiri kufamba nemari dzishoma sterek. Saka ipo tiri kutaura, this is my advertising now. Yeah. If you are excited about DUZ and what we're doing, we welcome donors. Donors with the right intention, in the right mode. We need your help. We want you to come in if you really believe in what we're trying to do here and change the country. But no, kana munhu ari campaign ne tumbo. No, that's not good. That's not good because I'm telling you right now, one thing I've noticed, we have a serious problem with alcohol in this. Oh my God. Yeah. No, it's a pandemic in this country.
It's terrible.
It's very, very bad.
And it's not just alcohol. It's a drug issue. Mm-hmm. It's a drug issue that's spanning from, when people talk about it on the mass scale, it's, the crystal meth or bronco, etc. But I think it's everything, right? It's the alcohol, it's the marijuana, it's the cigarettes, and for some people, the sugar, whatever, all these things that people are addicted to. But I don't want to deep dive into things that I've heard you talk about in other interviews. I've heard you talk about the drug issue already. But I want to talk about it like slightly from a slightly different perspective. I think one of the issues well, not one of the issues, but like I think around the issue of, let's say, marijuana, for example, as we see global trends towards legalizing it, and there being no real substantial proof that it's significantly worse than alcohol is. Like, more people are going to die on the roads because of being drunk on the roads than it will be because of marijuana.
Correct.
And yet this could be an industry that could be generating a lot of revenue. And we've seen they've started to issue out the licenses, etc. But I think a lot of that could be expedited.
Correct.
I genuinely believe that everyone who wants to smoke marijuana in this country will find it. And they will buy it and smoke it. So why is that not a thing that we would rather control via making sure that the growing of it is, done under specific standards, and that, we are actually collecting tax revenue from the sale of these things and then exporting as well? I don't know if you have any opinion on that specifically.
I do. A very good friend of mine actually owned several grow facilities in the United States, legalized. So I was a very big part of that conversation with him. There's actually an assessment that was done I think in 2022 on Zimbabwe specifically when it comes to cannabis and various versions of THC products that exist. In our government, we're probably going to decriminalize it. Yeah. And we're going to create the opportunity because it's not just there. So if you look at the effects of it from a healthcare perspective, from cataract surgery, there's a medical side that exists. Yeah. Like you said, they're going to find it. But if we are able to get it, license it, and be able to put measures around there, that way nothing is spiked, nothing is laced in it, and remains. There is an opportunity for Zimbabwe to even start creating medical supplies for the neighboring SADC countries, as long as we are able to make sure those licenses are given to the right people.
The right people.
Yeah. So putting people in jail for smoking a blunt or whatever the case may be, I don't think it's the best use of state funds. Not at all. Yeah, we've got bigger problems, and so many in the United States, many states are decriminalizing. In fact, almost every time there's some sort of election, 8 or 10 states are coming off saying we're going to decriminalize it. They just see the paperwork that takes place is there, the danger that exists. People more likely going to have alcohol. In fact, I think texting is probably right up there. Texting and driving is another form of accidents that exist when you're talking about the impacts of it. Yeah. So what they've done is they create specific stores to go to. Some cities have become very smart. I think Denver was the first one. Colorado was the first one. But the city of Denver, you can actually go in and sit inside and enjoy a drink and actually smoke, almost like they do with shisha and these bars. So people are going in and the social life and then just monitoring what happens afterwards. So,
yeah, we're
going to decriminalize that one.
Yes.
So if...
so that's pretty straightforward. In fact, I'll send you I actually have it on my phone. I can pull it up. There was a huge, in terms about even the revenue, just for Zimbabwe, was done by an organization called Frontier. Yeah. If I remember correctly, Frontier did it. And I've sent it to a few colleagues as well. But I had friends that had 3 in-grow facilities in the United States, 3 or 4 in-grow facilities in the United States. Now, I'll tell you this. It is a delicate plant. It is very expensive. It is a very expensive process because you're talking about, maintaining temperature. You're talking about heavy usage of power and electricity because you have fans running 24/7. Yeah. So these grow houses have to be very independent of the national grid. Yeah.
I'm going to round up because
thank you.
I know you. You have to rush. So this will be the last thing. I think there's so much PTSD. We talked about PTSD in our war vets earlier. I think there's so much PTSD with the average Zimbabwean now, where even when it comes to certain ideas. So for instance, when Shamisa in the last election cycle, one of my favorite stories, came out and said, oh, we're going to build spaghetti roads. I think that's now become something that's unfathomable. It's so far out from what we need today that we can't take you seriously if that's the thing that you talk about. And it's not that we can't take you seriously, but it's just not what people would rather be talking about.
Correct.
And I think those issues are not limited to just that. I think it's a wide variety of issues. Some of them around like currency reforms. You talked about crypto, and for the most part, people just don't understand.
They don't.
And they mostly don't have the capacity, because now you want someone to go understand blockchain and the advantages of it, and they're just not going to do that. Do you water down your campaign now, going into this final phase of it, and just say, we're going to focus on what people need to hear? Or does it matter to be entirely authentic with your electorate?
Great question. And no, the goal is to be authentic all the time.
Yeah.
But you have to be cognizant of the crowd you're speaking to. So if I was like, when I was at CZI, if you're talking to people there, we're talking about, the retail side and currency and how inflation affects them, not as just as a business, but even as an employer. So if they decide to take their business to another country, neighboring country, and still ship product in, we've got a serious problem in job loss. So we're seeing with our currency right now, if people don't switch to another currency, USD or however else they bridge the gap. I also talked to them about increasing the minimum wage. So we said, okay, we need to put a minimum wage. How does it affect business if we put a minimum wage? They said, well, if you do that, you have to help us in other areas.
Yeah.
So there's something called the Laffer curve. So let me go back to, I was about to get into economics.
Yeah.
I was going down there. So I don't water it down. But what I do is I speak to the audience that's there. And when we looked at, and I'm glad you mentioned the Spaghetti Road and bullet train stuff, because that was some of the first things I said, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. People, and so even today I can even tell they plagiarize. They're plagiarizing, you see they're using words now like prosperity a lot. They're plagiarizing some of our, they're now trying to talk about jobs. What we did is we took and said, what is the most important to the people that they'll resonate, which is basically political communication, right? So the political communication is what matters to people now, and how do we get people to get off the sofa and say, I'm going to go stand in line, register to vote, and I'm actually going to go back and cast my vote.
Yeah.
Because we want to talk to things that matter to them. The fact that we see the increase in diaspora remittances means that people here on the ground are being taken care of by people outside.
Yeah.
And we need that. We need the people. People that live outside are not wealthy. People think that someone lives in the UK or lives in Australia, they're living lavishly. It's a difficult society. That they have expenses and families there too. How do we make this work? We have to give people independence. So while the country was free from independence in 1980, people don't feel independent.
Yeah.
Because they're still reliant on government or a handout. And so our message is we keep our message simple. Yeah. Now we know in the background we have to create these other measures come into play, but we keep our message simple so people can relate to it. So we don't really water it down. We just change the way we deliver the message. But the message remains the same: as we want you to be prosperous. We want you to really be independent of your life, and we want you to make, if you want a job, there is a job available, and that job is a minimum wage attached to it. And if you put money in an institution or you invest in an institution, that you're protected because there is a justice system that is strong and viable, and no one's above the law. There is rule of law in this country.
There's property rights.
And if you're an entrepreneur, you're a young youth, and you say, listen, I saw something in Ghana. I want to be able to start it here and create it here. That there's an incubator or an accelerator you can go to through a 13-week program that allows you to perfect that idea into a business. And we partner you with other strong business owners in the country. So your business we're not importing technology. You're building it, that's now a Zimbabwean technology that fits into our culture and into our system. And those are things that we want to imply. So we talk to different groups of people about various different things. Yeah. So the goal is to remain authentic in our message and not have the battle of pies in the sky. Yeah. Messages. Because that stuff will catch up to you. I remember one interview. Someone sent it to me the other day. He said, "Oh, you should post this." I said, "Well, I'm not going to do that." But he mentions, said Trump promised him $15 billion or the bullet train. And then he went to the UK where people know what this is all about. Yeah. And man, how embarrassing was that? At Hard Talk and says, wait a minute, so you think a bullet train can go from Harare to Bulaya and there's not a train in the world that can do that. Yeah. How can you build that? That shows that priorities are not correct. Yeah. And this is so the first thing I'll say is, let's go look at the councils you have. Mm. Are we picking up trash delivery in councils that are inside ZANU-PF and opposition councils? Yeah. And if you're not picking up trash, I hate to break it to you, I think bullet trains is a little far. Let's start picking up, or whatever the case may be, whatever you're promising. Let's go pick up the trash. Let's get rid of sewage in the streets. Let's make sure there's clean water in Blois. right now there's clean water in Bulawayo, and some people are getting ready to enter these elections as a candidate, and they're running again.
Yeah.
At the same city they live in, there's brown water coming out of the tap. Cholera is rampant. Imagine.
How?
Yeah, so people have to really be informed about their candidates, where they are, and make that impact. And you'll see that come to a national level, to the executive branch. So, no, we keep our message simple.
Absolutely. All the best on the campaign
Thank
trail.
Thank you.
Well, I might have mentioned this when I tweeted about it, but this interview is a result of me beating you at golf.
Oh, boy.
So we're going to be playing again on Friday.
Oh, God.
This guy might be replacing Jason soon and doing all the interviews, but thank you so much for coming through.
No, thank you for having me.
Absolutely appreciate it.
Thank you.
And if you want to watch an interview where he talks about more about his life and the journey, which aren't things that we try to focus on in this interview, there's a really good interview that he did with Trevor. You should go and check that out. Cheers.
Thank you. Thanks, brother.
Yeah, this was great.
Thank you.